Deep in the modern-day Sudanese desert, the air shimmers with an unforgiving heat, and the wind sculpts endless oceans of golden sand. It is a harsh, breathtaking landscape that seems to stretch into eternity, guarding secrets that have slept beneath the dunes for millennia. Rising abruptly from this barren expanse is a sight that defies expectation, a jagged horizon of steep ancient monuments piercing the sky. There are more pyramids standing here in the deserts of Sudan than in all of Egypt combined, serving as the silent, sun-baked sentinels of a forgotten empire. These hidden pyramids of the Sudanese desert are not mere imitations, but the royal tombs of the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization whose architectural and celestial mastery rivaled the greatest powers of the ancient world. To understand the rise of this majestic African superpower, one must first look to the vast corridor along the Middle Nile, a geographic fortress that shaped the destiny of ancient Nubia. For hundreds of miles, the life-giving river carved its way through unforgiving rock and arid plains, creating a narrow ribbon of fertility surrounded by hostile desert. This natural stronghold was defined by the cataracts, a series of treacherous rocky rapids that churned the Nile into impassable whitewater. These formidable barriers acted as impenetrable natural shields, protecting the southern lands from naval invasions and allowing a distinct, powerful civilization to incubate in relative safety. Shielded by these roaring rapids, the people of the Middle Nile leveraged their geographic fortress to control the flow of exotic goods between the heart of Africa and the Mediterranean world. Yet, despite their undeniable grandeur and strategic brilliance, a profound historical question lingers over these ancient sands. How did an empire of such staggering magnitude, one that conquered its rivals and built hundreds of monuments, become a mere footnote in the shadow of its famous northern neighbor? The answer lies in centuries of erasure, driven by early archaeological biases that systematically dismissed Kush as a lesser outpost incapable of independent greatness. Eurocentric scholars of the past looked upon these magnificent ruins and falsely concluded they must be the work of displaced Egyptians, stripping an entire African civilization of its rightful agency and historical triumph. But the earth remembers what men try to forget, and modern excavations are finally dismantling the shadow of Egypt to reveal the true indigenous glory of the Kushite kings and queens. Long before the first pyramid was raised in Sudan, the foundations of this power were laid around 2500 BCE with the emergence of the Kingdom of Kerma. Situated just above the third cataract of the Nile, Kerma stood as the first highly centralized state in Nubia, a bustling metropolis of wealth, agriculture, and complex social hierarchy. At the very heart of this ancient capital loomed the Defufa, massive, solid mud brick temples that dominated the skyline. These awe-inspiring, multi-story structures served as the spiritual and economic centers of the kingdom, where priests conducted sacred rituals and merchants traded ivory, ebony, and incense. The sheer scale of the Defufa provides undeniable proof that the Kingdom of Kerma was a sophisticated, highly organized society capable of marshaling immense labor and resources long before the rise of later empires. However, the staggering wealth of Kerma eventually drew the covetous gaze of an aggressive neighbor, leading to the devastating expansion of Egypt's new kingdom into Nubian territory. Egyptian pharaohs launched brutal military campaigns southward, intent on crushing their wealthy rival and seizing absolute control of the trade routes. The primary motive for this ruthless colonization was the extraction of one specific, highly prized resource: gold. The ancient Egyptian word for this precious metal was nub, which historians believe is the very root of the name Nubia, forever branding the region by the immense wealth that was violently stripped from its earth to adorn the temples and tombs of foreign kings. This era of occupation triggered a fascinating and complex psychological shift, resulting in the deliberate Egyptianization of the Nubian elite. Rather than simply ruling by force, the colonizers implemented a sophisticated strategy of cultural assimilation to ensure the loyalty of their conquered subjects. Kushite nobles and the children of local chieftains were taken from their homeland and transported north to the grand Egyptian capital of Thebes. There, they were immersed in a foreign world, educated in Egyptian hieroglyphs, indoctrinated into the worship of Egyptian gods like Amun, and trained in foreign military tactics, all designed to mold them into compliant, Egyptianized vassals. Yet, this forced cultural immersion carried an unintended consequence, as the Egyptianization of the Nubian elite ultimately armed the future leaders of Kush with the exact political and military knowledge needed to one day challenge their oppressors. History consistently reveals the cyclical nature of power, demonstrating how empires often blindly sow the seeds of their own obsolescence. As Egypt's Bronze Age supremacy eventually began to fracture into chaos, corruption, and civil war, the student in the South watched patiently, preparing to become the master. The wheel of history is relentless, and empires often sow the seeds of their own obsolescence. As Egypt's magnificent Bronze Age fractured into the chaos and civil war of the Third Intermediate Period, the very power dynamics of the Nile Valley began to invert, allowing the student to become the master. The shifting sands of political instability left Egypt vulnerable, its once unified landscape now a fractured mosaic of rival factions and unprotected borders. Far to the south, beyond the turbulent reach of the warring Egyptian lords, a formidable new center of gravity emerged at the Kushite capital of Napata. This thriving metropolis was anchored by an awe-inspiring natural monument known as Jebel Barkal. Rising abruptly from the desert floor, this towering, flat-topped mesa possessed a striking pinnacle that resembled a rearing cobra wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Both the Kushites and their northern neighbors recognized this geological marvel as deeply sacred ground. They believed Jebel Barkal was the true southern home of the supreme creator god Amun, granting the rulers of Napata an unparalleled divine mandate. From the shadow of this holy mountain, a dynasty of visionary leaders prepared to reclaim the glory of the Nile. Empowered by the blessings of Amun at Jebel Barkal, the Kushite gaze turned steadily northward toward a fractured and bleeding Egypt. In 727 BCE, this divine mandate ignited an unprecedented military campaign led by the formidable King Pi. He did not march out of Nubia merely to conquer a foreign land, but rather to save Egypt from its own political decay and spiritual corruption. Pi viewed himself as the true guardian of Egyptian traditions, launching a holy war to restore universal order. His forces sailed down the Nile with absolute conviction, engaging the fragmented Egyptian coalitions in a series of brilliant tactical strikes. City after city fell to the Kushite advance, yet Pi's approach was marked by a profound restraint, prioritizing submission and spiritual purification over the wanton destruction typical of ancient warfare. The sheer audacity of a southern king sailing north to discipline the squabbling lords of Egypt shattered centuries of imperial hierarchy, forever altering the destiny of the ancient world. The precise details of this legendary campaign are immortalized on the victory stela of Pi. A stela is a massive, freestanding stone slab used in the ancient world to bear inscriptions, reliefs, or monumental decrees. Discovered at Jebel Barkal, this towering granite monument serves as a masterclass in political propaganda and historical documentation. The text etched into the stone reveals an extraordinary code of conduct, detailing Pi's unique, almost chivalrous rules of engagement. He commanded his soldiers to fight only in the light of day, to allow his enemies time to prepare their defenses, and to respect the sacred temples of the cities they besieged. It is a striking portrait of a ruler who commanded with absolute might, yet governed with deep religious piety. Reading the declarations carved into that granite slab, one feels the undeniable presence of a king who believed his authority was absolute, righteous, and divinely ordained. Pi's triumphant unification of the Nile Valley, officially established the 25th dynasty of Egypt. For nearly a century, this lineage of Kushite monarchs, widely known today as the Black Pharaohs, ruled a vast and wealthy empire that stretched uninterrupted from the shores of the Mediterranean Sea deep into the heart of the African continent. Rather than imposing a foreign culture upon their new subjects, these Nubian kings meticulously presented themselves as the ultimate traditionalists. They embraced the ancient royal titles, revived forgotten religious rituals, and commissioned art in the classic Egyptian style, all to prove they were the legitimate restorers of Ma'at, the ancient principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. This era of restored glory reached its absolute zenith under the reign of Pharaoh Taharqa. Known across the ancient world as a master strategist and a patron of the arts, Taharqa poured the immense wealth of his empire into a golden age of monumental construction. His architectural ambitions were designed to leave a permanent, towering mark upon the landscape of both Egypt and Nubia. Armies of skilled artisans and laborers were mobilized to raise colossal structures from the earth. Taharqa commissioned sweeping additions to the great temple complex of Karnak in Thebes, erecting massive columns that still stand today, while simultaneously transforming Jebel Barkal into a sprawling religious epicenter rivaling anything built by his predecessors. The sheer scale of Taharqa's building projects cemented his legacy as a titan of the ancient world, ensuring his name would be whispered in awe from the Levant to the deep Sahara. Yet, the vast wealth and expanding influence of the 25th dynasty eventually drew the gaze of a terrifying new superpower. Looming on the northeastern horizon was the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a ruthless and highly organized military machine rapidly expanding its territory across the Near East. The collision between these two titans of antiquity was both inevitable and devastating. The geopolitical landscape shifted violently as the Kushite forces marched out to defend their northern borders against the Assyrian advance. It was a brutal clash defined by a stark technological disparity, pitting the traditional bronze weaponry and chariots of the Black Pharaohs against the iron-forged swords and advanced siege engines of the Assyrian war machine. The devastating clash with the iron-wielding Assyrian war machine forced the Kushite pharaohs to retreat from their northern conquests, leaving Egypt behind to face a profoundly uncertain future. How does an empire endure the psychological and economic devastation of losing its greatest prize? When the Black Pharaohs relinquished their grip on the Mediterranean world, many ancient historians assumed the Kingdom of Kush would simply wither away into the desert sands. Yet the retreat from Egypt was not a death knell for this resilient civilization, but rather the catalyst for a magnificent rebirth. Stripped of their northern territories, the Kushite people turned their gaze inward and southward, drawing upon the deep ancestral strength of the African interior to forge an entirely new era of prosperity. Rebuilding their shattered economy required a fundamental restructuring of their state, severing the deep administrative ties that had long bound them to the Nile Delta. To protect their sovereignty from future northern invasions, the Kushite leadership orchestrated a deliberate and masterful strategic relocation. They moved their royal capital hundreds of miles south to the city of Meroë, positioning the heart of their empire safely beyond the treacherous rapids of the Nile River's fifth cataract. This geographic shift provided an impenetrable natural fortress against the armies of Egypt and Rome, insulating the royal court from foreign interference. Meroë became the secure nucleus of a redefined kingdom, allowing its rulers to govern vast southern territories without the constant threat of northern incursions. Operating from this secure new vantage point, the Kushite administration developed sophisticated trade networks that extended deep into the heart of sub-Saharan Africa. To envision Meroë is to discard the image of a barren, sun-scorched wasteland, and instead imagine a thriving, vibrant metropolis pulsing with life. The new capital was blessed with abundant summer rains that transformed the surrounding landscape into a verdant paradise of fertile soil and sweeping grasslands, Vast, sprawling forests of acacia trees stretched across the horizon, providing a lush canopy that sheltered a magnificent array of wildlife and fueled the city's booming industries. It was an awe-inspiring transformation, a place where the bounty of the earth nurtured a civilization that was distinctly and proudly African in its character. The sheer abundance of these natural resources set the stage for an industrial revolution that would forever alter the balance of power on the continent. From the fertile earth of this southern sanctuary emerged the most transformative innovation of the Kingdom of Kush, which was the absolute mastery of iron. Meroë rapidly evolved into a thundering industrial powerhouse, earning a reputation among modern archaeologists as the Birmingham of Africa. Even today, colossal mountains of ancient iron slag still surround the ruins of the city, standing as silent testaments to a profound historical revelation. These massive, rusted hills represent generations of relentless metallurgical production, marking a monumental leap forward that separated Kush from the bronze-wielding empires of the past. The mechanics of the Kushite iron industry were a marvel of ancient engineering and environmental adaptation. Skilled artisans mined the rich, local iron ore from the surrounding hills, bringing it to massive smelting furnaces constructed precisely to harness the natural elements. They utilized the seemingly endless supply of acacia wood to produce high-quality charcoal, generating the intense, blinding heat required to separate the metal from the rock. The furnaces were strategically positioned to catch the prevailing desert winds, acting as natural bellows that drove the temperatures high enough to forge the future of the empire. This mastery of elemental forces yielded a steady, massive output of high-grade metal that flooded the markets of the ancient world. The mastery of iron was not merely an industrial achievement, but a profound source of technological empowerment that resonated through every facet of Kushite life. Just as steel built the foundations of the modern world, iron secured the enduring independence and prosperity of Meroë. With this unbreakable metal, they forged stronger plows to till the fertile earth, dramatically increasing their agricultural yields to feed a growing metropolis. More importantly, they crafted devastatingly effective weapons, equipping a formidable military force that ensured the Kingdom of Kush would never again kneel to a foreign conqueror. Fortified by this industrial might and geographic isolation, the kingdom began to express a cultural identity entirely untethered from its northern neighbors. Rising from the sun-baked sands of the Sudanese desert, the royal necropolises of Meroë present a breathtaking architectural vision. Here, hundreds of pyramids pierce the horizon, forming a dense, jagged skyline that stands in stark contrast to the sprawling, isolated monuments of Giza. These are the tombs of Kushite royalty, built not as mere imitations of their northern neighbors, but as a distinct evolution of monumental design. The Meroitic pyramids are instantly recognizable by their dramatic, soaring profiles. They feature significantly steeper angles and much narrower bases than traditional Egyptian structures, creating a sharp, needle-like silhouette against the vast African sky. Instead of the smooth, polished limestone casing that once gleamed on the Great Pyramid, these Nubian monuments were constructed with stepped courses of sandstone blocks, giving them a rugged, enduring texture that has weathered millennia of desert winds. The precise geometry of these steep slopes required entirely different mathematical calculations and building strategies than those employed by ancient architects in the distant past. To achieve these towering heights without the massive labor forces of the Old Kingdom, Kushite engineers devised highly efficient construction techniques. Archaeological evidence suggests they utilized a tool known as a shaduf, a counterweighted lifting device traditionally used for drawing water, which they ingeniously adapted for masonry. By pivoting a long pole on a central fulcrum, a small team could effortlessly hoist heavy sandstone blocks up the rapidly rising, steep sides of the pyramid. The internal structure of these monuments further highlights the practical brilliance of Meroitic builders. Rather than stacking solid stone all the way through, They often constructed a sturdy outer shell of shaped sandstone blocks and filled the interior with a dense, compacted core of rubble and earth. This method drastically reduced the time and material required for construction, allowing successive rulers to rapidly erect their own towering memorials while maintaining the structural integrity needed to survive the centuries. This pragmatic yet majestic approach to engineering reflects a civilization that valued both the eternal grandeur of its monarchs and the efficient mastery of its resources. The true secret of the Kushite pyramids, however, lies not in their soaring peaks, but in the earth below. In a profound departure from Egyptian tradition, where the pharaoh's burial chamber was often suspended high within the protective masonry of the pyramid itself, the royalty of Meroë chose the deep embrace of the subterranean world. The pyramid was merely a monumental marker, a grand tombstone resting far above the actual resting place. To reach the dead, one had to descend a long stairway carved directly into the bedrock, positioned well outside the pyramid's base. These steep stairs led deep underground to a series of vaulted, subterranean chambers where the king or queen was laid to rest alongside their most precious treasures. Once the royal burial was complete, the subterranean entrance was sealed, and the pyramid was constructed over the site, enclosing the sovereign in eternal darkness. This deliberate return to the earth speaks to a profound spiritual connection with the ancestral soil, anchoring the divine ruler forever in the motherland. While the burial chambers remained hidden in the dark, the daily rituals of the living took place in the light, specifically within the intricate offering chapels attached to the eastern face of almost every Nubian pyramid. Facing the rising sun, these small ornate structures served as the vital bridge between the mortal realm and the divine afterlife. It was here that priests and family members would gather to present food, drink, and prayers to sustain the departed sovereign. The interior walls of these chapels are adorned with breathtaking, deeply carved reliefs that offer a window into the Kushite soul. The artwork vividly depicts the royal deceased making offerings to the gods, their forms rendered in a unique artistic style that masterfully blends traditional Egyptian iconography with distinct, robust indigenous features. Queens and kings are shown wearing elaborate garments and heavy jewelry, their physical power and African identity proudly immortalized in stone. This artistic synthesis mirrors a much broader and profound shift in the spiritual life of the empire. For centuries, especially during and immediately following their rule over Egypt, the Kushites had venerated traditional Egyptian deities, elevating the ram-headed god Amun and the mother goddess Isis to the highest positions in their pantheon. They built massive temples to Amun at the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal, viewing themselves as the true protectors of his sacred cult. Yet, as the capital shifted south to Meroë and the empire grew more isolated from the Mediterranean world, the religious landscape began to transform. The Kushites did not abandon the old gods, but they increasingly integrated powerful, indigenous African deities into their state religion. This theological evolution reflected a growing assertion of their own unique cultural identity, separate and distinct from the shadow of their northern neighbors. Through this spiritual reclamation, the people of Kush forged a divine narrative that was entirely their own, deeply rooted in the harsh and beautiful realities of their southern domain. At the absolute center of this religious renaissance stood a terrifying and magnificent figure, Apetamak, the supreme indigenous deity of the Meroitic era. Apetamak was a fiercely powerful warrior god, universally depicted with the muscular body of a man and the roaring head of a maned lion. He was the divine protector of the royal family, the ultimate source of military victory, and a symbol of the untamed strength of the African savanna. His presence on temple walls is designed to inspire pure awe and terror in equal measure. Massive stone reliefs show Apetamak towering over his subjects, grasping the leashes of captured prisoners, or personally devouring the enemies of Kush. In some of the most striking depictions, he is shown as a multi-headed, multi-armed serpent-lion hybrid, a complex mythological being whose ferocity guaranteed the safety and eternal sovereignty of the empire. The worship of this lion god cemented the martial authority of the rulers, proving that their power was sanctioned not by foreign deities, but by the very apex predator of their own lands. It was under the watchful, fierce gaze of Epidemic that one of the most awe-inspiring aspects of Kushite society flourished, challenging everything the ancient world thought it knew about power and gender. This was the era of the Kandaks, the legendary, autonomous queens of Kush. The title Kandake, which is the historical root of the modern name Candace, designated a royal woman of immense political, religious, and military authority, who ruled not merely as a king's consort, but as a sovereign monarch in her own absolute right. The title of Kandake, which would eventually echo through history as the root of the name Candace, belonged to the fierce, autonomous queens of Kush. These were not mere consorts resting in the shadows of their husbands, but sovereign rulers who commanded armies, directed massive building projects, and held the absolute devotion of their people. To look upon a Kandake was to behold the living embodiment of divine authority, draped in gold and wielding the undeniable power of an empire. This fierce independence of the Kushite queens did not arise by chance, but was deeply rooted in the very fabric of how power was inherited and legitimized within the kingdom. The kingdom operated on a complex and highly stable system of matrilineal succession, fundamentally distinguishing it from the patriarchal dynasties of neighboring civilizations. In Meroë, the royal bloodline was anchored by the king's sister or mother, ensuring that the right to rule was passed securely through the female lineage. This structure protected the throne from illegitimate claims and elevated the royal women to the pinnacle of political and religious life. Because the royal mother was the ultimate source of legitimacy, her chosen heir was the undisputed sovereign, and she often ruled as regent or co-regent until he came of age. Over centuries, this system evolved, allowing the Kandaks to ascend the throne directly as sole monarchs. They became the supreme political architects of their age, steering the destiny of Kush with a blend of strategic brilliance and unyielding resolve. Bolstered by this unshakable foundation of female authority, one specific ruler would soon rise to confront the most formidable military machine the ancient world had ever seen. In the late 1st century before the Common Era, the Roman Empire, fresh from its conquest of Egypt, turned its hungry gaze southward toward the wealth of Kush. It was then that Kandake Amanirenas took the throne, a brilliant tactician and a fearsome warrior, who was recorded by ancient historians as having lost an eye in battle. Recognizing the looming threat of Roman expansion under Emperor Augustus, she did not wait for the legions to march into her territory. Instead, Amanirenas launched a devastating preemptive strike against the Roman garrisons stationed at the border cities of Syene, Elephantine, and Philae. Commanding an army of tens of thousands, she swept through the Roman defenses with shocking speed and precision. The Kushite forces dismantled the occupying outposts, capturing prisoners and reclaiming territories that had been suffocated by foreign control. This audacious assault sent shockwaves all the way to Rome, proving that the southern kingdom would not be quietly absorbed into the expanding imperial frontier. In a masterstroke of psychological warfare, Amanirenas claimed a spectacular trophy from the conquered Roman settlements. Her forces seized a magnificent, larger-than-life bronze statue of Emperor Augustus, a gleaming symbol of his self-proclaimed divinity and global dominance. Upon returning to the capital city of Meroë, the Kushites systematically decapitated the imperial effigy, an act of supreme defiance that shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. The bronze head of Augustus was then buried deliberately beneath the steps of a temple dedicated to victory. With this single, awe-inspiring gesture, the Kandake ensured a profound humiliation for the empire. Every time her people entered the sacred sanctuary to worship, they literally trampled upon the face of the Roman emperor, forever cementing Kushite supremacy over the foreign invader in the minds of her citizens. The war with Rome raged on for years, characterized by fierce battles and shifting front lines, until both sides recognized the staggering cost of the conflict. Amanarinas, proving herself as formidable in diplomacy as she was in warfare, dispatched ambassadors to the Greek island of Samos to negotiate directly with Augustus. The resulting Treaty of Samos was a monumental diplomatic triumph for the African kingdom. Under the terms of the treaty, Rome agreed to withdraw its legions from contested border territories and establish a permanent demilitarized zone. Most remarkably, Augustus conceded that Kush would be entirely exempt from paying any tribute to Rome, a concession almost unheard of in the annals of Roman imperial history. The mighty Roman war machine had been fought to a standstill by an African queen, forced to recognize the absolute sovereignty of Meroë. This unprecedented treaty secured the borders of Kush, ensuring that the kingdom would remain an independent powerhouse while neighboring lands fell to imperial subjugation. The triumph of Candace Amanirenas stands as a profound testament to the unyielding human spirit of resistance against foreign imperialism. Her leadership demonstrated how a sovereign African nation could utilize superior local knowledge, unwavering courage, and brilliant strategic foresight to protect its people. It shatters the enduring myth of an ancient world entirely dominated by European powers, revealing a dynamic landscape where African empires dictated terms to global conquerors. This legacy of indigenous sovereignty redefined the geopolitical balance of the ancient world. The Kingdom of Kush was not a peripheral state waiting to be civilized by outsiders, but a central, undeniable force that demanded respect on the global stage. The story of Amanarinas is a vital chapter in human history, illustrating the magnificent heights of African agency and the fierce protection of the motherland's cultural identity. With the Roman threat neutralized and their borders secure, the Kushites turned their boundless energy inward, ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity. The peace secured by the Treaty of Samos acted as a catalyst for an explosive expansion of the Meroitic trade network. Immense wealth began to flow into the capital, transforming Meroë into a cosmopolitan hub that bridged the heart of Africa with the Mediterranean world and the distant East. The city became a vibrant nexus of commerce, where the constant arrival of merchant caravans fueled a booming, sophisticated economy. The bustling markets of Meroë were a sensory marvel, overflowing with the most coveted sub-Saharan goods of the ancient world. Traders exchanged massive quantities of gleaming ivory, dark and heavy ebony wood, and exquisite leopard skins destined for the elite of distant lands. Alongside these luxury items, the kingdom exported exotic animals, rich gold, and their legendary iron tools, firmly establishing Kush as the indispensable economic beating heart of the region. The sheer magnitude of this wealth transformed the capital into a glittering beacon of prosperity, fundamentally altering the balance of power across the ancient world. To command such vast riches, the Kingdom of Kush engineered an intricate, sprawling trade network that stretched far beyond the predictable rhythms of the Nile. They understood that relying solely on the river left them vulnerable to the treacherous, unnavigable rapids known as cataracts, which could easily choke the flow of commerce. In a masterstroke of logistical brilliance, Kushite merchants bypassed these dangerous waters entirely by charting overland caravan routes through the unforgiving eastern desert. These heavily laden expeditions forged paths to the bustling ports of the Red Sea, connecting the heart of Africa directly with the lucrative maritime markets of Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean. The sight of these massive caravans dissolving into the shimmering heat of the desert horizon stood as a testament to a civilization that refused to be contained by its geography. Yet, the true measure of Kushite sovereignty was not just found in their economic independence, but in a profound intellectual revolution that redefined their cultural identity. For centuries, the rulers of Kush had utilized Egyptian hieroglyphs to record their triumphs and divine decrees, adopting the language of their former colonizers. Then, in a powerful assertion of indigenous pride, they abandoned the Egyptian writing system entirely and birthed their own unique alphabet, known today as the Meroitic script. This brilliant phonetic system, comprising 23 distinct signs, marked an extraordinary leap in linguistic sophistication and signaled a definitive break from the shadow of the Pharaohs. The meticulous carving of these new symbols onto temple walls and monumental stelae permanently embedded the distinct voice of ancient Nubia into the stone of the earth. Today, that voice remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the ancient world, as the Meroitic language has never been fully deciphered. We can read the phonetic values of the letters, sounding out the names of queens and gods, but the deeper meaning of their vocabulary and grammar remains locked away behind an impenetrable veil of time. Across the Sudanese desert, thousands of inscriptions stand as a majestic, silent library waiting for its Rosetta Stone, holding the untold histories, poems, and prayers of a fully literate African empire. It is a profound tragedy of history that a civilization so desperate to speak its own truth is currently forced to remain mute. While their words await translation, their physical mastery over a challenging landscape speaks volumes about their ingenuity and resilience. As the climate of the region grew increasingly arid, the Kingdom of Kush relied on a critical technological innovation to ensure their survival, a massive earthwork known as the Hafir. These monumental excavated reservoirs were strategically positioned and meticulously engineered to capture and store the brief, intense bursts of seasonal rainfall that washed across the plains. Measuring hundreds of feet across and plunging deep into the earth, a single Hafir could hold millions of gallons of water, transforming a deadly dry season into a period of sustained agricultural productivity. The shimmering surfaces of these artificial lakes became vital oases, drawing herds of cattle and sustaining sprawling settlements far beyond the immediate banks of the Nile. The construction and maintenance of these reservoirs required immense communal effort, advanced hydrological understanding, and a centralized authority capable of mobilizing thousands of workers. It reflects a universal human drive to not merely exist within a hostile environment, but to actively reshape it for the prosperity of future generations. The people of Kush did not simply endure the creeping desertification of their homeland. They masterfully engineered a solution that allowed their cities to flourish where others would have perished. This profound adaptation underscores a civilization that possessed the foresight and technical prowess to bend the very landscape to its will. This environmental mastery provided the stable foundation upon which the kingdom could cultivate not only crops, but a vibrant, flourishing culture. Secure in their borders and nourished by their engineered oases, the artists of Kush initiated a profound aesthetic shift that further distanced them from their northern neighbors. They deliberately abandoned the rigid, idealized, and slender forms that had characterized Egyptian art for millennia, seeking instead to celebrate their own physical reality. Reliefs from this era proudly display Kushite royalty with distinctively African features, emphasizing robust, powerful physiques and voluminous, flowing garments that projected indigenous concepts of beauty and authority. Queens and kings were carved with broad shoulders and commanding presence, adorned with heavy jewelry and intricate scarification marks that honored their unique cultural heritage. By carving their true likenesses into the monumental sandstone of their temples, the rulers of Meroë ensured that their authentic, majestic image would outlast the empire itself. The artistic independence of Kush extended far beyond monumental stone, finding perhaps its most exquisite expression in the mastery of Meroitic ceramics. Deep within the kingdom's bustling workshops, artisans perfected a meticulous process of clay refinement and temperature control that transformed the earth of the Nile Valley into breathtaking works of art. They developed highly specialized kilns capable of maintaining intense, even heat, allowing potters to push the physical limits of their medium. The crowning achievement of these ancient workshops was the creation of what archaeologists now call eggshell ceramics. These vessels were crafted with walls so impossibly thin and perfectly fired that they became translucent, adorned with vibrant geometric patterns and indigenous flora. This delicate pottery rivaled the finest wares produced by the contemporary Greek and Roman worlds, serving as highly coveted luxury goods that showcased the unparalleled technical sophistication of Kushite craftsmen. The fragile beauty of these translucent bowls stood in striking contrast to the heavy iron tools that built the empire, proving that Meroë was a city of both immense industrial power and refined aesthetic grace. That same pursuit of refined luxury is breathtakingly evident in the discovery of the royal baths at Meroë, an architectural marvel hidden beneath the Sudanese sands. Stepping into this ancient complex, one would have encountered a vast, Hellenistic-inspired water sanctuary situated right in the arid heart of Africa. The central pool, lined with meticulously painted stucco, was surrounded by an elaborate colonnade that offered shade from the relentless desert sun. Water flowed constantly into this grand basin through magnificent lion-headed spouts, a powerful symbol of indigenous Kushite authority merged with foreign engineering. The walls surrounding the sanctuary were decorated with a stunning fusion of classical Mediterranean motifs and native African deities, creating an opulent oasis where the royal court could bathe in a setting that physically represented their cosmopolitan reach and immense wealth. This lavish aquatic sanctuary demonstrates that the Kushite elite were not isolated in the desert, but were active, sophisticated participants in a broader global culture of luxury and leisure. Yet, even the most opulent sanctuaries could not shield the kingdom from the creeping shadows of the 4th century CE, which ushered in the slow, complex decline of the Meroitic Empire. The exact mechanics of this unraveling remain a profound historical mystery, pieced together from silent ruins and shifting landscapes. Some scholars point to a slow-moving ecological disaster, suggesting that the kingdom's insatiable iron industry required such massive amounts of timber that overlogging eventually triggered severe environmental degradation and desertification. Simultaneously, the geopolitical tectonic plates of the ancient world were shifting, fundamentally altering the lucrative global trade routes that had long sustained the wealth of Meroë. The bustling caravan paths that once brought exotic goods and boundless gold through the heart of Kush began to bypass the kingdom entirely, slowly starving the royal treasury and weakening the central authority of the monarchs. This gradual economic starvation was drastically accelerated by a fatal geopolitical shift to the southeast, the meteoric rise of the Kingdom of Aksum in the Ethiopian highlands. Aksum emerged as a formidable new superpower, boasting advanced agricultural systems and a rapidly expanding military force. Recognizing the strategic importance of the region's commerce, the Aksumite rulers systematically began to assert their dominance over the vital maritime networks of the ancient world. By seizing control of the critical Red Sea trade ports, Aksum effectively bypassed the Nile Valley corridor, placing a devastating economic chokehold on the Kingdom of Kush. The luxury goods from the African interior, once the exclusive monopoly of Meroitic merchants, now flowed directly through Aksumite harbors to the Roman Empire and beyond, cutting off the lifeblood of Kush's imperial wealth. Stripped of their commercial supremacy and facing an increasingly exhausted landscape, the weakened Meroitic state was left dangerously vulnerable to the ambitions of its new southern rival. The historical revelation of the empire's ultimate end is carved in stone, marking the moment when the long twilight of Kush finally gave way to total collapse. Around 330 CE, the armies of Aksum marched north under the command of King Ezana, launching a devastating invasion into the heart of Meroitic territory. The once impenetrable capital, already fractured by economic decline, fell to the advancing Ethiopian forces. King Ezana commemorated this decisive conquest by erecting a massive stone stela, proudly boasting of his total victory over the Noba, the people of the Nubian region. This towering monument of triumph served as the official death knell for a civilization that had endured, innovated, and ruled for over 1,000 years, officially closing the chapter on the grand kingdom of Kush. The once thriving iron furnaces grew cold, and the grand avenues of Meroë were slowly reclaimed by the encroaching sands of the Sahara. However, The collapse of the central political authority did not mean the erasure of the people, leading into the fascinating and immediate aftermath known archaeologically as the X group or Balana culture. In the wake of Meroë's fall, regional leaders and warlords filled the power vacuum, establishing new, smaller kingdoms along the Nile. These transitional societies fiercely maintained the echoes of their imperial past while adapting to a rapidly changing world. The incredible royal tombs of this era evoke a profound sense of wonder, revealing kings buried with magnificent silver crowns, adorned with semi-precious stones, and alongside fully caparisoned, sacrificed horses. These opulent burials display a striking visual language, seamlessly blending ancient Kushite spiritual iconography with emerging Byzantine artistic styles, proving that the region's cultural wealth remained highly sophisticated even after the empire fractured. The glittering artifacts pulled from the Balana tombs confirm that the descendants of Kush continued to command vast resources and maintain complex international relationships. The cultural and political DNA of ancient Kush did not vanish into the desert winds. Rather, it evolved and fundamentally shaped the next great era of African history. Over the subsequent centuries, the remnants of the Meroitic state and the vibrant X-group culture gradually reorganized, laying the foundational bedrock for the powerful medieval Christian kingdoms of Nubia that would soon rise along the Nile. The political and cultural DNA of the Kushite Empire did not simply vanish into the desert sands, but rather evolved and reorganized into formidable new structures. As the centralized power of Meroë fractured, regional leaders and local elites gathered the remnants of their statecraft to forge the medieval Christian kingdoms of Makuria, Nobatia, and Alodia. These new realms inherited the profound administrative capabilities of their ancestors, blending the ancient Meroitic understanding of trade and governance with the rising influence of Byzantine Christianity. This seamless transition of authority ensured that the strategic dominance of the Middle Nile remained firmly in Nubian hands, allowing their civilization to command regional trade for centuries to come. Such transformations reveal a profound universal truth about the nature of cultural resilience across the African continent. While grand empires inevitably fall and their monumental capitals may be abandoned to the shifting dunes, the people themselves endure, carrying the indelible marks of their history forward. The Nubian populace demonstrated an extraordinary capacity to adapt to new religious paradigms and shifting political landscapes without ever losing their foundational identity. This enduring spirit bridged the ancient world of the Pharaohs with the medieval era, weaving an unbroken thread of heritage that defied the collapse of the Meroitic throne. Their survival was not a mere accident of geography, but a testament to a deeply ingrained societal strength that allowed them to absorb external shocks and emerge reborn, yet fundamentally unchanged at their core. Across the fertile banks of the Nile and the arid expanses of the surrounding savanna, this resilient lineage continued to cultivate the land, their daily rhythms echoing the enduring heartbeat of their ancestors. Yet, despite this magnificent legacy of survival and innovation, the modern rediscovery of Kush was initially poisoned by the systemic prejudices of early 20th century archaeology. When Western scholars first arrived to excavate the Sudanese sands, they were confronted with towering pyramids, sophisticated ironworks, and intricate temples that rivaled anything found in the Mediterranean world. Rather than accepting these marvels as the indigenous achievements of a powerful African civilization, the academic establishment of the era deliberately misinterpreted the evidence to fit a deeply flawed Eurocentric worldview. The awe-inspiring truth of a highly advanced, independent Black African empire was simply unfathomable to the colonial mindset of these early historians. Consequently, a vast and complex system of historical erasure was constructed, attributing the architectural and cultural triumphs of Meroë and Napata to hypothetical light-skinned invaders, or dismissing them as mere provincial imitations of Egyptian grandeur. This institutionalized bias effectively stripped the Nubian people of their rightful agency, casting a long, dark shadow over the true narrative of the motherland for generations. The most prominent architect of this historical distortion was the renowned American archaeologist George Reisner, who directed extensive excavations throughout Nubia in the early 1900s. As his teams unearthed the spectacular royal cemeteries of El Kuru and Nuri, they discovered undeniable masterpieces of ancient engineering, alongside intricate jewelry and monumental statues of the Kushite kings. Confronted with the physical remains of the black pharaohs who had once conquered and ruled all of Egypt, Reisner engaged in a meticulous process of intellectual contortion to deny their indigenous origins. He meticulously catalogued the brilliant artifacts and mapped the subterranean burial chambers, only to publish reports concluding that these rulers must have been of a different racial stock who had somehow lost their way in the African interior. Reisner systematically classified the distinct, innovative features of Kushite art and architecture as signs of cultural degeneration, rather than recognizing them as the vibrant expressions of a unique and evolving African aesthetic. This flawed framework became the accepted academic orthodoxy, deeply entrenching a distorted vision of antiquity that actively suppressed the profound brilliance of the Kushite state. Today, however, a breathtaking renaissance is sweeping through the field of Nubian archaeology, shattering those antiquated falsehoods and reclaiming the majestic truth of ancient Kush. Contemporary teams of historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists, increasingly led by Sudanese scholars and diverse global voices, are returning to these sacred sites with fresh eyes and profound reverence. Utilizing cutting-edge satellite imagery, advanced ground-penetrating radar, and meticulous new excavation techniques, they are resurrecting the true, unvarnished glory of this ancient powerhouse. There is a deeply moving power in witnessing this historical justice unfold, as the intricate details of Meroitic script are painstakingly deciphered, and the sophisticated urban planning of their cities is finally brought into the light. Every newly unearthed artifact and every corrected museum placard serves as a triumphant victory over the shadows of erasure, restoring the dignity and awe-inspiring legacy of a people who shaped the course of human history. As this vibrant reclamation reshapes our understanding of the past, it also turns our gaze toward the vast, unexplored horizons that still await discovery. Beneath the sweeping, sun-baked expanse of the Sudanese desert, an untold wealth of ancient history remains locked away in silent anticipation. Vast tracts of this ancient landscape, stretching far beyond the well-trodden paths of the royal necropolises, have yet to feel the careful brush of a modern archaeologist. One cannot help but look across the shimmering dunes and wonder what profound mysteries still lie hidden beneath the golden earth, waiting to rewrite the history books once again. Are there undiscovered temples dedicated to the lion god Apetamak, their sandstone walls still vibrant with ancient pigments? Perhaps there are untouched royal tombs belonging to forgotten Kandakes, or the bustling remains of sprawling provincial cities that could illuminate the daily lives of the common Kushite citizen. The landscape itself seems to hold its breath, acting as a vast and silent guardian over a subterranean world of unimaginable wonder. The sheer scale of these unexcavated territories suggests that our current knowledge of the Kushite Empire represents merely a fraction of its true geographical and cultural magnitude. This expanding realization forces a monumental shift in how we perceive the very foundations of human civilization, demanding that we finally redraw the map of antiquity. For centuries, the historical lens has been overwhelmingly focused on the Mediterranean basin, treating the great empires of Africa as mere peripheral actors in a drama centered on Greece and Rome. The undeniable majesty of Kush shatters this restrictive framework, proving that the African interior was home to independent, highly sophisticated centers of power that rivaled the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. Recognizing the profound influence of Meroë and Napata compels us to acknowledge a vibrant, interconnected ancient world where trade, philosophy, and technological innovation flowed freely across the continent. It challenges us to look beyond the Nile Delta and see the deep, pulsing heart of a motherland that birthed empires of unparalleled grandeur, forever altering our understanding of who we are and where the true centers of ancient power truly lay. By decentering the Mediterranean, this shifting historical framework finally places the Kingdom of Kush at its rightful, dynamic crossroads of ancient global civilization. This reclamation of Kushite history reverberates far beyond the confines of academic archaeology, offering a profound psychological anchor for the modern African diaspora. For centuries, the narrative of a dark, unrecorded continent was used to sever descendants from their ancestral heritage, erasing the memory of black pharaohs who commanded the Nile and queens who stared down empires. Unearthing the majesty of Kush shatters that silence, providing undeniable proof that ancient Africa produced long, distinct histories of monumental civilization entirely independent of outside influence. To look upon the steep angles of the Meroitic pyramids or trace the intricate carvings of the lion god Apedemak is to witness a direct lineage of indigenous brilliance. This restored history instills a deep, resonant pride, transforming the way modern generations of African descent perceive their place in the human story. The ruins of Kush stand not just as relics of the past, but as towering monuments to an enduring ancestral strength that survived the deliberate erosions of time and prejudice. Empowered by this restored ancestral memory, a new era of scholarship is actively rewriting the textbooks that once marginalized the motherland. The durable consequence of this awakening is now etched into the very soil of modern Sudan, where international coalitions of archaeologists and local experts work side by side under the blistering Saharan sun. Vast excavation sites, once neglected or funded merely as afterthoughts to Egyptian expeditions, have transformed into bustling hubs of dedicated Nubian research. Drones sweep over the arid landscapes mapping unexcavated royal cities, while ground-penetrating radar reveals the sprawling blueprints of forgotten iron-smelting centers hidden beneath the dunes. Within the hushed halls of global museums, this physical unearthing has triggered a massive institutional reckoning. Curators are painstakingly relabeling artifacts that were previously misattributed to southern Egyptian outposts, finally acknowledging them as the distinct, masterful creations of the Kushite Empire. The golden jewelry of Queen Amenemhat and the delicate pottery of Kerma are now displayed in halls dedicated solely to their own sovereign legacy, fundamentally altering how millions of visitors visually experience ancient African history. For the local Sudanese communities living in the shadow of Jebel Barkal and the royal necropolises, this archaeological renaissance has fundamentally reshaped their daily economic and cultural realities. Generations of families who have farmed the banks of the Nile are now finding formal employment as vital custodians, site managers, and expert excavators of their own heritage. The preservation of these ancient sites has become a communal mandate, deeply integrating the protection of Kushite history into the modern educational curriculum of the region. This localized stewardship ensures that the wealth of knowledge extracted from the earth does not simply vanish into foreign university vaults. Local guides now narrate the triumphs of King Paye and the architectural genius of Taharqa to global travelers, reclaiming the authority to tell their own story. The human aftermath of uncovering Kush is a profound restoration of agency, transforming passive residents into the active, fiercely proud guardians of a world-class historical treasure. This localized empowerment feeds into a staggering global aftershock that continues to ripple through the broader study of human antiquity. The turning point arrived with the 2003 discovery of the monumental statues at the site of Dukigel by archaeologist Charles Bonnet, a revelation that shattered the long-held assumption that Kush was merely a cultural satellite. The unearthing of these massive black granite pharaohs, intentionally hidden and preserved, proved definitively that Nubian rulers possessed a sophisticated, fiercely independent royal ideology that rivaled any contemporary superpower. The sheer emotional weight of standing before these towering granite kings forces a complete reevaluation of the ancient geopolitical landscape. It is a profound realization that the flow of power, culture, and innovation along the Nile was never a one-way street descending from the Mediterranean. Recognizing the full might of Kush demands that we look southward with awe, acknowledging a majestic African epicenter that shaped the destiny of the ancient world just as powerfully as it was shaped by it. Yet, despite these monumental breakthroughs, the sands of the motherland still guard one of antiquity's most tantalizing and frustrating secrets. The Meroitic script, the written language of the later Kushite Empire, remains largely undeciphered, standing as an impenetrable barrier between modern scholars and the inner thoughts of a highly literate civilization. While the phonetic values of the 23 symbols are known, allowing historians to pronounce the names of gods and monarchs, the actual vocabulary and grammar of the language are still lost to time. The consequence of this linguistic silence is a historical record that must be pieced together almost entirely from the outside looking in. We can trace the borders of their empire, marvel at their ironworks, and gaze upon the faces of their deities, but we cannot read their poetry, their legal decrees, or the personal letters of their queens. Until the Rosetta Stone of the Meroitic language is finally pulled from the earth, the true, authentic voice of Kush remains an unresolved question, whispering just out of reach. The enduring mystery of their language only deepens the profound reverence we hold for the physical legacy they left behind. The long-term consequence of studying Kush is not just an accumulation of facts, but a fundamental shift in how humanity defines architectural and cultural resilience. To witness the survival of the Meroë pyramids, standing defiant against millennia of desert winds and historical erasure, is to feel a stirring connection to an unbreakable human spirit. This resilience serves as a permanent cultural beacon, proving that true greatness cannot be permanently buried by colonial narratives or the shifting sands of time. The majesty of ancient Nubia has etched an indelible mark on the collective human consciousness, demanding respect and inspiring a deep emotional awe for the capabilities of early African societies. It leaves us with the powerful realization that the motherland was not just the cradle of humanity, but the forge of its most enduring and magnificent civilizations. Moving beyond the silent stones and undeciphered texts, the ongoing revelation of Kushite grandeur continues to alter the very fabric of contemporary African historical education. New generations of students across the continent are no longer introduced to their heritage through the lens of foreign conquerors, but through the sovereign triumphs of indigenous empires. This educational shift bridges the vast chasm between ancient glory and modern identity, empowering young minds with the concrete knowledge that their ancestors were masterful architects, diplomats, and innovators. This intellectual awakening reverberates outward, transforming the physical landscapes where global history is curated and displayed. The grand exhibition halls of the world are being actively redesigned, stripping away the isolated, exoticized dioramas of the past to present ancient Africa as a vast, interconnected network of sophisticated states. Visitors now walk through immersive environments that place the iron-rich city of Meroë on equal footing with Rome and Athens, surrounded by the tangible artifacts of a thriving, cosmopolitan superpower. The architectural footprint of this historical aftershock is undeniable, as new museums and cultural centers rise from the earth, built specifically to house the expanding volume of Nubian discoveries. These modern sanctuaries of knowledge stand as gleaming testaments to a shifting global paradigm, where the grandeur of the Kingdom of Kush is no longer a mere footnote, but a central, monumental pillar in the grand architecture of human history. The exact mechanism behind the final collapse of Kush remains one of antiquity's most profound, unresolved questions. While the invasion by the Aksumite kingdom delivered a fatal military blow, The internal systemic failures that left the capital of Meroë vulnerable are still heavily debated by archaeologists. Some scholars point to a severe ecological crisis, suggesting that the voracious demand for charcoal to fuel their massive iron-smelting furnaces completely deforested the surrounding landscape. Without trees to stabilize the soil, the fertile lands that once fed a booming metropolis may have surrendered to the encroaching desert sands. Alternatively, the shifting of global trade routes toward the Red Sea could have systematically starved the Kushite economy of its vital wealth. Because the Meroitic script remains largely undeciphered, the Kushites' own administrative records concerning this decline are locked away, leaving modern historians to reconstruct their final days from scattered Roman and Aksumite fragments rather than indigenous accounts. The long-term consequence of unearthing Kushite history has forced a permanent procedural shift within modern Egyptology and African archaeology. For over a century, global institutions categorized Nubian artifacts merely as southern extensions of Egyptian culture, physically separating them in museum wings and academic departments. Today, international archaeological teams operate under a fundamentally different mandate, treating Sudan not as a periphery, but as a primary theater of ancient civilization with its own distinct sovereign identity. This institutional course correction is most visible in the ongoing conservation efforts funded by global heritage organizations, which now prioritize the stabilization of the Meroitic pyramids. Engineers and conservators deploy advanced ground-penetrating radar and photogrammetry to map the royal necropolises, ensuring that the unique architectural heritage of Kush is preserved on its own terms. The scientific community no longer looks at the Middle Nile Valley merely to understand ancient Egypt, but to understand the independent genius of Kush itself. For the modern communities living along the bend of the Nile, the reclamation of this narrative carries a profound human consequence. Generations of Sudanese citizens were educated under colonial frameworks that minimized their ancestral legacy, framing their homeland as a historical void. The steady excavation of royal cities and temple complexes has returned a stolen lineage to the people who walk the very same riverbanks today, replacing historical erasure with undeniable proof of ancient grandeur. Local Sudanese archaeologists and excavation workers are no longer just laborers for foreign expeditions, but active custodians of their own past. They guide the unearthing of the Black Pharaohs, piecing together the fragmented statues of King Taharka and the lion-headed god Apetamak. This restored history provides a powerful cultural anchor, offering modern descendants a tangible source of identity and pride drawn directly from the soil of their forebears. The resurrection of Kush sends a seismic aftershock through our broader understanding of human history, shattering the long-held assumption that the African interior was isolated from the ancient global stage. This was an empire that fought Rome to a standstill, traded with India, ruled Egypt, and forged a unique written language, proving that the African continent was a central dynamic engine of antiquity. The legacy of the Kushite kings and the Kandakes forces the world to look south of the Sahara, not with presumption, but with profound, undeniable reverence. As the fierce Saharan sun sets over the royal cemetery at Meroë, it casts long, sharp shadows from the steep sandstone pyramids across the deep red desert. Beneath these silent monuments, the kings and queens of Kush still hold their ground, their golden crowns and iron weapons waiting in the dark, an eternal testament to a motherland that shaped the ancient world.